Welcome to Coming Out of the Spiritual Closet with your host, me, Brittany Wittig. Join me every week to explore and demystify the world of modern spirituality. Welcome back. This week, I am going to talk about the simple perspective shift that you can make today, right now, that will change your reality. But first, I wanted to announce that this podcast, Coming Out of the Spiritual Closet, is now a globally ranked top 10% podcast. What? It's very, very exciting. And I want to thank each and every one of you for listening and for your reviews, for sharing. You made this possible, and I am so grateful because I am so happy that this information is going to be reaching more ears. So my next big goal for the podcast is to get it into the top 5% of all podcasts. And in order to do that, I'm definitely going to need your help. If you are listening and resonating with this show, please take the time to leave a rating, leave a review, take a screenshot and share it on your social media. Tell your friends about it. Whatever you can do to spread the word, I really, truly appreciate it. Okay, so let's get started. The simple perspective shift that has the power to change your reality right away. This is such a simple thing that I do all the time in my life. It's one of those things that feels so simple that I think I often forget to share it. So this is a question that you can ask yourself. And the more you ask yourself this question, the easier life gets, in my experience. Before we get to the question, the other thing I want to say is that there is a healthy way to make this perspective shift, and there's a really unhealthy way to make this perspective shift. And I am going to differentiate between the two. So the question that you can ask yourself, no matter what is going on in your life, that will change your experience of your life is, how is this experience benefiting me? How is this experience benefiting me? Now, we probably ask ourselves this question very naturally when things are going well, when things are happening in the way that maybe we would like them to. Then it's very obvious how these things are benefiting us. But I would challenge you to ask yourself this question: how is this experience benefiting me when you are going through an experience that is more challenging? When you are experiencing something that is more difficult, even if it's a simple thing that's more difficult. For instance, this morning I had the experience of waiting a ridiculously long time in a restaurant for breakfast. One of those situations where they were short-staffed, the food took forever, and I actually paused and asked myself this question: how is this experience benefiting me? And I realized that I was sitting in a restaurant along a beautiful stretch of water in warm, comfortable weather. And one of the ways that I came up with that experience was benefiting me was that I was getting a chance to enjoy the view for a longer period of time. I was being forced to slow down and take in my surroundings, which happened to be very beautiful at the time. So that's a really simple example of this. A much bigger example of this would be when I was diagnosed with cancer. I also asked myself this question then. And as you can imagine, it's a lot more charged to ask yourself this question when you're experiencing a big life-altering challenge, like, for instance, a cancer diagnosis, maybe a divorce, anything that feels difficult, a death. This is actually a question that I asked myself after my mother passed away. And the truth is, there is always an answer to this question. There always is something about a life experience, no matter how challenging it is, that can benefit you. And when you ask yourself this question, and you honestly answer it. Usually, if I have the ability to do so, I like to answer this question in my journal by writing absolutely everything that comes into my head. When you ask yourself this question, and the more you ask yourself this question in your life, the more your perspective of reality will shift, the more your reality will change. Because what happens with this question is this question empowers you to receive benefit from everything that happens in your life, because so much we don't get to control, right? There's so many things that we don't get to control. And those challenging things that we don't get to control, when we are asking ourselves how those things benefit us regularly, we are giving ourselves back control over our experience of our reality. Now, here is the caveat to this, and it is 100% important. You can't just ask yourself this question and then shift your perspective. Because if you were to do that, you would be completely ignoring, completely bypassing your natural, necessary emotional response to the challenging situation. When you ask yourself this question and you write all of those things down, you also have to take the time to feel all of the emotions that have come up around the challenging situation. You cannot skip the challenging emotions, and asking yourself this question is not a way to avoid experiencing all of your emotions. If you do that, then this question becomes a way to practice toxic positivity. It becomes a way to repress your true emotions. And there is nothing healthy about that. Those emotions don't go away. We've talked about that many times on this podcast. When you repress your emotions and don't allow yourself to fully feel them, they will find another way to be expressed. And often that is eventually through physical dis-ease. So when you ask yourself this question, you also must sit with your feelings. You cannot emotionally bypass. An example of me not doing this in a healthy way is last week's podcast episode, the situation I talked about in last week's podcast episode. So if you haven't listened, I would recommend that you go back and listen to that so that you know what I'm talking about. But basically, last week I talked about how I had repressed my true emotions around my long-term side effects from cancer treatment. And one of the big long-term side effects I mentioned is early menopause. I went through early menopause. I asked myself this question when I went through that early menopause. I asked myself, how is this experience benefiting me? And I actually did not let myself feel all of my feelings when I asked myself that question. And what happened is I actually repressed a lot of my challenging emotions around these long-term side effects from cancer treatment. And I began to have tension. I began to avoid conversation about these side effects. I began to avoid thinking about these side effects because I had emotionally bypassed my true feelings about these side effects. So don't do that. This is me sharing a cautionary tale. The thing to do is to feel all of your feelings. And I also want to make it clear, this is a perfect example of how sneaky our egos can be. Even someone like me who teaches how to feel all of your feelings can sometimes accidentally emotionally bypass myself. So what you want to do if you are faced with a challenging situation in your life, sit down somewhere private. And we talked about this in last week's episode a bit. So follow the exercise we talked about last week. Sit down somewhere private and allow yourself to release emotion. There's many different ways you can do that. Crying, shaking, screaming into a pillow, punching pillows. There's all kinds of different ways that you can allow your emotions out, but allow yourself to fully feel the challenging emotions that you're experiencing around a situation. And then ask yourself, how is this experience benefiting me? And write down everything that comes through for you. Do a brain dump of all the ways that this situation could be benefiting you. And what's amazing about this is that you will begin to feel gratitude for the challenging situation as long as you have allowed yourself to feel all of those feelings associated with it. When I think about my cancer journey and my experience of having cancer, I am immensely, deeply grateful for it because I took the time, one, to feel all of my challenging feelings around it as I went through the experience, and two, I asked myself constantly this question: how is this experience benefiting me? And so I can look back and see all of the ways that that experience really did expand my consciousness, expand me as a person. It really made my life bigger, not smaller. Well, thank you so much for tuning in and listening this week. I would love to hear how this question goes for you. If you implement this in your life, please connect with me on Instagram or through my website. Both of those links are in the show notes. And reach out and let me know how it felt for you asking this question and starting to shift your perspective of reality in a massive way.